Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope you're doing well. I just finished reading The Gallows Pole by Benjamin Myers, and I highly recommend it if you've never read it. It's historical fiction. It won the Walter Scott Prize, but it doesn't feel like historical fiction. It feels much closer to what David Peace has referred to as occult history. So it's based in true events with real individuals, but there's this whole narrative written, and it's definitely a narrative that sort of takes a sideways look at that event in history. So it's about the Cragg Vale Coiners, set in the late 1760s in West Yorkshire in Britain, and it's about this small community led by David Hartley, calls himself King David, the true king of the North, no shades of Game of Thrones, and it's a time of great change. So the Industrial Revolution is sort of underway, and the hand looms that many of the families in this small rural community on these moors have used, they're becoming obsolete. They're being replaced by mills. They talk about mills as big as cathedrals. That phrase pops up a couple of times. And there's this sense that while they have sort of had almost like a subsistence level of living for the past few generations in this community, that way of life itself is about to become extinct, and what will remain. And so Hartley and his brothers and then others around the village, they become the Cragg Vale Coiners. Initially they clip the edges of coins and then try to melt them and refashion, more coins. And so there's not a high return on that. And then gradually it seems like they take coins and maybe make alloys with other metals using a character called the Alchemist, who wears a weird hood and is mostly silent and strange. And then diluting, diminishing the value of the metals in the coins and restamping them, inflation is occurring. And it's a criminal enterprise. But there's also this very real sense that Myers makes clear of. The community sees it as the Cragg Vale Coiners are about the only thing that stands between this community and starvation, in a very real sense. That's discussed a couple of times. And kind of as an indictment of, the society at large that allows this, this to occur for families. And so it's a very strange book. There are whole sections that are written from the perspective, and it's very clear early on, of David Hartley himself in a 1770s rural, vernacular dialect that can be challenging to read. It's not as challenging as Middle English or probably even Elizabethan English, but that it doesn't have the conventional 20th, 21st century spelling that we're used to. But it really is an extraordinary book. It's an unflinching book. It looks at, this is a criminal enterprise, and so it's an unflinching look at just how dark that path becomes. There are murders, there's, serious violence, sexual violence. There's probably about 7 pages total across the 360 that are really quite disturbingly violent and dark. So if that bothers you, don't read it. This isn't a book I would recommend to everybody, but it is a book I'll recommend. I want to read a quick passage that kind of gives a sense of what Myers is working with. Here on the moor edge, the earth smelled like a basket of broken goose eggs, and patterns swirled on the surface of puddles that were fed only by droplets falling from the moss that tasseled the moor edge. Millions of beaded specks like tiny interconnected green stars, as if a mannequin galaxy had sprung from the soil. Even during a drought time such as this, the moor was rarely dry, a wet rag never fully wrung. It took the stubborn scavengers and the stealthy to live up here, the cunning and the vicious, the solitary and the half-mad, the buzzard and the raven, the polecat and the pine marten, the hare, the fox, and the adder. Here lived those wild and red and pointed tooth and curled claw, and alongside them were those that walked on 2 legs and lived in houses, but still emulated many of the upland creatures' feral ways, quarrymen and poachers, tinkers and trappers and hermits, men that did not want to be found, men who made myths of their own mad delusions. Here they gathered. And I'm all in. I went and read that to my wife after I had finished that passage. And a little, towards the end, you get a sense of what, as much as this is about the Cragg Vale Coiners and about just the wildness of the West Yorkshire moors, it's also about the people in the communities. I'll say it again. You are an old man and your eyesight is failing in more ways than one. There's none of us can see into the future, but I have glimpsed it, and so has our David. All this clipping was his chance to protect our little corner of the world and profit from it, to have our name written in stone, because the future of this valley is not for the likes of you and me. We are born free men. We are not to be enslaved, for that is what surely beckons when the wheels of industry do grind onwards. The land is being sold off. They say there are mills the size of cathedrals in Lancashire. They're putting up great chimneys of stone that are twice as tall as any tree, and there are machines that do the work of 100 men, and it takes mountains of coal to feed them. They're sinking mines just to get the dusky diamonds from the ground to fuel the mills. Children are in their employment now, children the age of your grandchildren. The handloom is over. The small holdings are being bought off, and people are turning each other over just to make a coin any way they can. It's every man working for themselves now, Father. And so we see there at the end, there is this elegy for this community that is going to disappear. It's going to be replaced by, coal mining communities and mills. And then in another 200 years, the coal mines are going to, run out. And that will take us into GB84 by David Peace. So I don't want to go too much more into the book because I don't want to spoil anything. It's strangely written, it's beautifully written, and I really do recommend it very highly. Hester Dunlop had recommended this after I'd made mention of a couple of books I enjoyed, and it didn't disappoint. And as I mentioned, of course, it feels very similar to David Peace's work, particularly GB84, which is is closer to an intense historical event, 1980 maybe, from the Red Riding Quartet. There are shades of The True History of the Kelly Gang by Peter Carey, and I've never quite managed to read this entire book. I once was working on it, and then some crazy things were happening in my life and at work. This was about 5 years ago, and then I tried rereading it back in the spring of 2020, and things just took a turn there as well. But it has this, of course, is written in the phrasing of Ned Kelly on his own, very similar to the passages that intercut the Gallows Pole. Shadow Country by Peter Matthiessen is another work, an excellent work that I think feels very close to the Gallows Pole and GB84 and True History of the Kelly Gang, where there's that sense of occult history, there's that sense of, people who are criminals but are also striving and part of they are criminals who are part of their community, and it's a very strange, juxtaposition that of course questions the community that allows that or necessitates it. Red Shift by Alan Garner I read earlier this year, and there were shades of this, particularly in the sections around the English Civil War, and also the sections the farthest back in time. I'm trying to remember when that was, maybe the 5th century. The way Myers intercuts the narrative with certain real letters from real life people or articles from the Leeds Mercury feels somewhat similar to the way James Ellroy writes, particularly in works like LA Confidential or perhaps the Cold 6000. With some of the indictments of the Industrial Revolution, it feels like there are a few shots going in the direction of Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. And William Gaddis' J.R., I think a lot of people are reading that right now. There is a pair, that theme of questioning economy and what it means on a human level is going on there. And then as a last weird aside, Wuthering Heights was written, in sort of that area of West Yorkshire where the Gallows Pole is set. And it's possible that Robert Parker, a real-life character, a real-life individual who's a character in the Gallows Pole, may have been an inspiration for Heathcliff, apparently, which I just thought was fascinating. And then last but not least, there were all sorts of really strange mystical references to the Stagman, which, that's why I'm wearing my stag shirt. But it also brought up, the ideas of Herne the Hunter or of, some of the mythology around stags. And Robert Graves' The White Goddess, is a great little reference to jump into for that. So let me know if you've read The Gallows Pole. I know it was published, I want to say, in the past 5 years, so it's fairly recent, but I really enjoyed it, and I'd be happy to hear if you have too. Thanks.